Number one Ibble Dibble here. Hello friends, welcome to my feature film-length boring video about Prince Harry's ghostwriter. Basically, this began as a reaction video to Prince Harry's ghostwriter's op-ed in The New Yorker about writing Spare, but I found myself not just falling down a rabbit hole, but wandering around the tunnels, mapping the Warren, ethically evaluating the personalities and politics of Watership Down, etc. I've left it as one video instead of splitting it into 15 parts because I don't think many people will be terribly interested in this. And instead, I've put chapters in for you completionists. So you can watch it at your whim, leave it, and come back to it and find your place. You are the real OGs of this channel. Thank you so much for watching. And thanks for chatting with me about all of this. Part 1. On the psychology of sugar. Making videos about H&M, I get comments from sugars literally every day. I believe people can learn, grow, and change, so I'm loath to say many of them are racist, stupid, and violent, though their comments are. I always check out their profiles. Often it's clearly or likely a bot or a comment farmer, not a real person. When it is a real person, it's almost always someone who, from their liked videos and playlists at least, seems they might experience identity issues of their own around race and class. They clearly identify with Meghan and see criticism of her as persecution of themselves and people like them. I say Meghan because I don't think I've ever gotten a comment from a Harry sugar. His defense seems to be a peripheral arm of the Meghan fandom. I'm disappointed that most of them clearly don't watch my video before they comment. For example, on my most recent video about Meghan's plastic surgery, I got a lot of "you're just jealous because black don't crack" type comments, and sorry, if you're not blind, as in if your eyes physically work, you have to acknowledge that Meghan has had work done. And if your ears work and you actually listen to the video, you'd know I was quite complimentary of it and quite supportive of those wishing to pursue plastic surgery. I'm disappointed by the bad faith arguments and flawed reasoning frequently employed by sugars, more so the bad faith arguments, because I understand most people are not formally educated or practiced in logical reasoning, and therefore the line between ignorance and disingenuity can blur pretty badly. I'm actually going to put a link in my description box below about RISA arguments and how to argue more successfully that I hope will benefit everyone, sugar and non-sugar alike. Sometimes I get people who still really don't know about whataboutism, but typically sugary counter-arguments hinge on picking out a single incorrect or debatable factoid, which I just threw in for fun anyway and is irrelevant to my point, and trying to extrapolate that inaccuracy into a thorough discrediting of my entire argument and its consequent consignment to hate speech. For example, I can't tell you how many sugars pointed out in my video on affiliate marketing that Anne Hathaway is not a two-time Academy Award winner. Quite right. She's a one-time winner, one-time nominee. Sorry, I thought she won for Rachel's Wedding. That doesn't detract in the slightest from my point, which was that the brands that hire Anne for ambassadorships, including Valentino and Bulgari, aren't hiring Meghan, and that's indicative of Meghan's unexpected failure to break into the Hollywood A-list post-Megxit. That doesn't make me, or Anne, or Valentino racist. I'm very frequently disappointed by sugar's use of ad hominems. I've discussed this before in my PSA video. They usually make me laugh. What about my voice makes them think I'm white, poor, old, ugly, unloved, and or mentally ill? Of course, they can't know or reasonably guess those things from what I've said and how I've said it, and their need to do so angrily is pure projection. They're the kind of people who don't mind bad behavior stemming from bad morals, but do mind when people make them feel ugly, poor, slow, unpopular, illogical, sad, out of control, and or not part of the in-group. Are they themselves moral failures, diagnosably disordered, or just having a bad day, week, year, decade? Are they just not on the level yet because they've had insufficient guidance in their lives and developed faulty judgment? Some people are bad, some people are very unlucky and are fated to learn everything the hard way. Most people are a bit of column A, a bit of column B. More than anything, I'm disappointed that the sugars mostly come out of the woodwork for videos about looks. clothes, surgery, ethnicity. It's crickets on the videos about Meghan's charity scams and Harry's family problems. Their engagement really reveals what sugars like and value about Meghan, and it's not flattering to her or them. I try to remember that many of these sugars may be young, and I hope that if they're shouting nonsense in my comment section, at least that means they're containing it elsewhere. And finally, in the words of Nick's father, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages you've had. All this to say, I certainly did not expect Prince Harry's ghostwriter, one-time nominated, one-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist J.R. Moehringer, to just be a sugar with the same insecurities, the same propensity to take bullshit at face value, the same desire to give terrible behavior a pass as the necessary manipulation of oppressive social systems, the same eagerness through ignorance or bad faith to draw false reversals from true conditions, the same drive to be perceived as better than other people. So I thought it would be fun, maybe to take a deep dive today into Prince Harry's ghost and think on whether the measure of a memoir is its ability to sell or its ability to inspire. Can we, the thinking public, continue to justify the conflation of economic and spiritual uplifting in pop culture? Moehringer's first notoriety, I suppose, came in 1998 when he was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in Feature Writing, which is long-form journalism, for a 1997 article in the LA Times titled The Champ. I think a lot of Moehringer's own psychology is revealed in this profile about a homeless former boxer, so I'd like to read you an excerpt. He wrote this at the age of 32. For most Americans, boxing makes no sense. The sport that once defined the nation now seems hopelessly archaic, like jousting or pistols at 6 paces. The uninitiated, the cultivated, the educated don't accept that boxing has existed since pre-Hellenic Greece, and possibly since the time of the pharaohs, because it concedes one musky truth about masculinity. Hitting a man is sometimes the most satisfying response to being a man. Disturbing, maybe, but there it is. Just the sight of two fighters belting each other around the ring triggers a soothing response, a womb-like reassurance that everything is less complicated than we've been led to believe. From brutality, clarity. As with the first taste of cold beer on a warm day, the first kiss of love in the dark, the first meaningful victory over an evenly matched foe, the brain's simplest part is appeased. Colors become brighter, shapes grow deeper, the world slides into smoother focus. And focus was what I craved the day I went searching for Champ. Focus was what made a cop reporter's moth-eaten tip look to me like the Hope Diamond. Focus was what I feared I'd lost on the job. As a newspaper writer, you spend much of your time walking up dirty steps to talk to dirty people about dirty things. Then, once in a great while, you meet an antidote to all that dirt. Champ wasn't the cleanest of men. He may have been the dirtiest man I ever met, but he was pure of heart. He wasn't the first homeless heavyweight either, not by a long shot. Another boxer lands on Skid Row every day, bug-eyed and scrambled, but none has a resume to compare with Champ's, or memory. He offered a return to the unalloyed joy of daily journalism, not to mention the winning ticket in the literary lottery. He was that rarest of rare birds, a people watcher's version of the condor, pugilisticum luciditas. He was noble. He was innocent. He was all mine. Every fighter, being human, has one glaring weakness. For some, it's a faint heart. For others, a lack of discipline. Satterfield's shortcoming was more comic, therefore more melodramatic. Nobody dished it out better, but few were less able to take it. He knocked out 7 of his first 12 opponents in the first round, a terrifying boxing blitzkrieg. But over the course of his 12-year professional career, he suffered many first-round knockouts himself. The skinny on Satterfield spliced together a common male fantasy with the most common male fear. Loaded with raw talent, he was doomed to fail because of one factory-installed flaw. Viewed as a literary artifact, the Satterfield file was a lovely sampler of overwrought prose. The Chicago sleep inducer, one fight writer called him. Embalming fluid in either hand, said another. Then, in the next breath, came the qualifiers. Boxing's Humpty Dumpty. a chin of Waterford, chill or be chilled. It was a prankish god who connected that dainty jaw and that sledgehammer arm to one man's body, and it was the same almighty jokester who put those Hemingway wannabes in charge of chronicling his rise and fall. A boxer, like a writer, must stand alone, Liebling wrote, inadvertently explaining the kinship between Champ and me. To my mind, anyone who flattened Rocky Marciano and put 3 bumps on Jake LaMotta's melon ranked between astronaut and Lakota warrior on the delicately calibrated scale of badasses, and thus deserved at least a Sunday profile. To Champ's mind, anyone willing to listen to 40-year-old boxing stories could only be a bored writer or a benevolent Martian. Still, there was something more basic about our connection. As a man, I couldn't get enough of his hyper-virile aura. As a homeless man, he couldn't get enough of my patient silence. Between his prattling and my scribbling, we became something like fast friends. Then I saw something bad. 2 felony arrests, one in 1969, one in 1975. Champ had been candid about his misdemeanors, but he had never mentioned these more serious offenses. Oh God, I said, scanning the arrest warrant. Thomas Harrison, also known as Bob Satterfield, lewd and lascivious act upon and with the body, child under the age of 14 years, Champ molesting his girlfriend's 10-year-old daughter, Champ punching the little girl's aunt in the mouth, Champ pleading guilty to assaulting the aunt, for which he received probation, and the molestation charge was dropped. Then, 6 years later, it happened again. Same girlfriend, different daughter. This is how it happens, I thought. This is how a newspaper writer learns to hate the world. I could feel the cynicism setting inside me like concrete. My reprieve from the dirtiness of everyday journalism had turned into a reaffirmation of everything I loathed and feared. My noble warrior, my male idol, my friend, was a walking, talking horror show, a homeless Humbert Humbert. They just took her word for it, he said of the jury. The only regret I have in life is that case she made against me with the baby. Only a monster would hurt a child, Champ said. He begged his ex-girlfriend to recant those false accusations, which he blamed on her paranoia and jealousy. She did recant, he said, but not to the judge. See you later, Champ, I said, hurrying him along, shaking that catcher's mitt of a hand. Then I accidentally looked into his eyes and I couldn't help myself. I believed him. Maybe it was faith born of guilt. Maybe it was my way of atoning. After all, I was the latest in a long line of people, managers, promoters, opponents, who wanted something from Champ. I wanted his aura, I wanted his story, I wanted his friendship. As partial restitution, the least I could give him was the benefit of the doubt. Asked to explain myself, I usually start with my father, who disappeared when I was 7 months old, walked away from his only son the way some people leave a party that's grown dull. At precisely the moment I learned to crawl, he ran. An unfair head start, I always felt. As a boy, I could repress all stirrings of curiosity about him because I knew what he sounded like, and this seemed sufficient. A well-known radio man in New York City, he often came floating out of my grandmother's olive-drab General Electric clock radio, cracking jokes and doing bits, until an adult passing through the room would lunge for the dial. It was thought that the voice upset me, and no one realized that the voice nourished me. My father was invisible, therefore mythic. He was whatever I wanted him to be, and his rumbling baritone inspired mental pictures of every male archetype, from Jesus to Joe Namath to Baloo the Bear in the Jungle Book. True, a love of boxing and a budding disenchantment with daily journalism sparked my original interest in Champ. Then a genuine fondness made me befriend him. But what made me study him like an insect under a microscope was my inescapable fascination with anyone who disappears, dissolves his identity, walks away from fame and family. When he pushed to deconstruct my relationship with Champ, I saw that we were trading more than fivers and fellowship. Champ was using me as a surrogate for his dead son, and I was using him as a stand-in for my own deep-voiced demon, whom I met after a brief, furious search. When the valor-ruined man is your father, the anguish quadruples and the manliness hemorrhages. Sometimes the anguish reaches such a crescendo that you simply disobey your eyes, anything to stanch the bleeding. An old boxing hand once said, "You never learn anything until you're tired." Above all, I'm tired enough to understand that Champ isn't Satterfield, never was Satterfield, never will be, no matter how hard I try. But I'm also tired enough to understand why he pretended to be Satterfield. He became Satterfield because he didn't like being Tommy Harrison. It was Satterfield Jr. who made me appreciate underestimate how ripe his father was for imitation. Fast, stylish, pretty, Satterfield was Champ's superior in every way. He was the ballyhooed one, the better one. Yes, he had the famously weak chin, but he led with it, time after time, meaning he had one hellacious heart. Champ must have studied Satterfield from afar, longingly, as I did. He must have gone to school on Satterfield, devouring facts about his life, as I did. He must have viewed Satterfield as a model, an ideal, as I also did. One day, Champ must have spied Satterfield across a musty gym, perhaps with Doc Kearns or a smoky nightclub where Iona was the prettiest girl in the joint, and said, ugh, to be him. From there, it was a short, dizzy trip to I am him. I think we can all agree that Moehringer is a beautiful writer whose skill and style were not at all showcased in Spare, and that past the age of 30, he was still seeking validation from father figures, trying to figure out what being a man meant to him and for him, and using his ostensible profiling of other people to publicly reflect on himself. Most interesting to me is this notion of letting a certain number of falsehoods, be they lies or misunderstandings, slide with our loved ones in order to help them maintain their sense of pride and help us maintain our idealized impression of them. Is this normal to you? Is it acceptable? Is it cultural? Is it old-fashioned? How far should we love people, warts and all, in our families, in our workplaces, in our society, in our media? Who draws the line between holding people accountable and tearing them down? Why do they draw it where they do? Qualified, dispassionate criticism is not bullying, it's not harassment, it's not hate speech, it's accountability. Why do so few people study and measure the scenarios in which people insist on this fake equivalency? How many people really believe the conflation, and how many people are just abusing their belief? Who profits from all this? Why are people so afraid of being held accountable? Finally, can we take a moment of silence for long-form journalism? 25 years ago, it was possible to write an in-depth profile that didn't define a legacy. It was possible to approach people and their stories with nuance and thought. And it was possible to change your mind about them later, or for them to change their minds about themselves later. Nowadays, the owners of news outlets have pushed writers like Moehringer into genres like memoir because they will not salary them to do this work. Instead, news is a 24-hour cycle of crisis coverage and PR releases, nothing more. There's no one digging for the deeper themes, there's no one trying to illustrate the big picture, and our understanding of the world around us has suffered for it. In journalism, plagiarism is pugilism, with reporters and commenters duking it out for views with very varying levels of skill in endless rounds, night after night, generation after generation. When stories are reduced to sound bites, journalism is reduced to oversimplified, reductive, inflammatory, attention-grabbing, self-serving, money-making bullshit. And the worst people have the most success. Which brings me to my next fun fact. Meghan has plagiarized J.R. Moehringer, and I'm not sure he's even aware of it. Let me read you the relevant excerpts from Meghan Markle's July 2015 op-ed in Elle magazine titled, Meghan Markle, I'm More Than an Other. I'm warning you in advance, this is not the easiest for me to read because her grammar sucks. While my mixed heritage may have created a gray area surrounding my self-identification, keeping me with a foot on both sides of the fence, I have come to embrace that, to say who I am, to share where I'm from, to voice my pride in being a strong, confident, mixed-race woman. That when asked to choose my ethnicity in a questionnaire, as in my 7th grade class, or these days to check other, I simply say, sorry world, this is not lost and I am not one of the others. I am enough exactly as I am. Just as black and white, when mixed, make gray, In many ways, that's what it did to my self-identity. It created a murky area of who I was, a haze around how people connected with me. I was gray, and who wants to be this indifferent color, devoid of depth and stuck in the middle? I certainly didn't. So you make a choice. Continue living your life feeling muddled in this abyss of self-misunderstanding, or you find your identity independent of it. You push for color-blind casting. You draw your own box. You introduce yourself as who you are, not what color your parents happen to be. You cultivate your life with people who don't lead with ethnic descriptions such as that black guy Tom, but rather friends who say, you know, Tom, who works at blah blah and dates fill in the blank girl. You create the identity you want for yourself, just as my ancestors did when they were given their freedom. Because in 1865, which is so shatteringly recent, when slavery was abolished in the United States, former slaves had to choose a name, a surname to be exact. Perhaps the closest thing to connecting me to my ever complex family tree, my longing to know where I come from, and the commonality that links me to my bloodline, is the choice that my great-great-great-grandfather made to start anew. He chose the last name Wisdom. He drew his own box. Now, obviously, when Meghan wrote this, she didn't know she was going to marry into royalty and have multiple professional genealogists scouring her lineage and uncovering every minute detail of her family tree. Needless to say, there was no Wisdom, surname or given name, anywhere in her family before or after slavery. It is not a question of insufficient records prior to emancipation. Sufficient records exist to demonstrate clearly that she lied. So did she just make that up to flex on other descendants of slaves, which is gross? Or did she copy it from a more interesting writer, which is also gross? The answer is both, and that more interesting writer was J.R. Moehringer, Harry's ghost. The article he actually won the Pulitzer Prize for, titled Crossing Over, appeared in the LA Times in 1999, the year Meghan graduated high school. It was, quote, a portrait of Gee's Bend, an isolated river community in Alabama where many descendants of slaves live, and how a proposed ferry to the mainland might change it. End quote. Again, I'm going to read you the relevant excerpts. In the early 30s, Roosevelt learned that hundreds of slave descendants were dying on a U-shaped peninsula in Alabama. After the stock market crashed, cotton had swooned to a nickel per pound, and vendors couldn't grow enough to pay for seeds and supplies. A Camden merchant had been advancing them what they needed, warehousing their cotton until prices rose again. But when the merchant died, he left no records, and one ruthless widow. It was a cold day in autumn. Armed with pistols, the widow's henchmen came by the ferry and went from cabin to cabin, closing out debts, settling accounts, robbing vendors blind. They took everything: tools, wagons, plows, furniture, eggs, hogs, mules, then wended like a funeral procession back to the river. Mary Lee's father, Wisdom, sat in the dirt and wept. He might have given up, might have gone under, but for Mary Lee's mother, she told him, "Don't cry," Mary Lee says. She told him, "Everything be all right, everything be all right." They survived that winter on wild plums and blackberries. They killed squirrels with slingshots and fished some. The Red Cross sent meal and meat, but life didn't get better until Roosevelt came to the rescue. He granted 100 families in Gee's Bend low-interest loans to buy modest farms and build new houses, with real glass windows and hardwood floors, the first some Benders ever set foot on. Mary Lee's memories of those days, wearing a fertilizer sack for a dress, picking cotton alongside her mother, sleeping 12 to a bed on a mattress stuffed with corn husks, remain clearer than any Rothstein photograph. So clear, she can hardly believe Wisdom's in the ground 22 years now, and Aola sits in her own permanent posture of defeat. The seventh child of Wisdom harbors a heavy shame about her lack of education. "I loved it school," Mary Lee says, "but I loved it men's more." By the way, I'm not mocking these people. I'm reading it as written. I'm doing the Tennessee accent of the only fully accented ancient Southerner I know personally. She left school in 6th grade, pregnant. She didn't even know what pregnant was when she found herself on hands and knees beside that cabin, throwing up the dewberries and dumplings she'd eaten for breakfast. Then she looked up and saw Aeola's troubled face at the window. "School days are over for you," Aeola said, explaining that a person was inside Mary Lee's stomach. "Ooh," Mary Lee says, "that struck me. I cried all day long, telling the Lord to take it away. But the Lord wouldn't move that. Some things the Lord don't move." Reuben was a hard man to love, but she loved him harder than anybody. Besides, he wasn't the only man who beat Mary Lee. Every man in her life raised a hand to her in anger. Wisdom didn't hesitate when she disobeyed. Wisdom's uncle, Isom, whipped her soundly when she was young for being willful. A blind former slave, Isom didn't understand that a girl born beside a willful river can't help but be willful now and then. So we find ourselves in the position where a narcissist's rhetoric inevitably forces us, where sympathy collides with accountability. Are we supposed to let Meghan's theft of Mary Lee's family history and J.R. Mehringer's Pulitzer Prize-winning writing slide because she needed a catchy ending for her own op-ed? No, obviously not. But are we supposed to let it slide because maybe she felt that she needed that catchy ending because she may have some deep-seated issues having to do with identifying or wondering if she should identify and how much as a member of an oppressed minority group? Systems of colorism and pressure to be the right kind of Black in America turn many good people into victims and perpetrators. It's natural to want to give people the benefit of the doubt in these matters. The decision becomes a little bit tougher, right? All of a sudden, sugary ghosts come out of the woodwork saying, "Boo, let it slide. Don't hold this poor little confused, hurt 35-year-old wealthy woman who's been given a national, nay, international platform accountable for her lies and plagiarism." Narcissists operate on these margins in these socially sensitive gray areas, as Meghan put it, betting that bystanders will say nothing. I'm of the opinion that we cannot let this pathological narcissistic behavior slide for a couple reasons. Number one, permitting this kind of behavior allows other narcissists, frauds, opportunistic manipulators, liars, and fools to add this pity play tool to their self-advancement toolbox. We can't let them do that. In this particular example, it's race baiting, but there are a lot of social gray areas in 2023. Number two, it's an insult to Meghan's actual great-great-grandfathers, her actual Alabama slave ancestors, who were very well attested and nothing to be ashamed of. Meghan's Alabama slave ancestors came from the Betts plantations in the far north of Alabama around Huntsville, in what is now Madison County, in 1783. Two brothers, Charles and Elijah Betts, inherited 7 slaves they took with them from Virginia to Alabama. They each built their own plantation, and they kept excellent records of all of their slaves, from the original 7 down to the 80 recorded by their respective grandsons, Elijah F. Betts, who had 46 slaves on a cotton plantation, and Edward Betts, who had 34 slaves at the time of emancipation. After emancipation, some of the Betts slaves remained there or moved not too far away around Chattanooga, Tennessee, as sharecroppers. Others, including Meghan's ancestors, moved to Ohio. Meghan is actually related to Mookie Betts, the LA Dodgers outfielder, through these Ohio ancestors. Katie Betts, Mookie's great-great-grandmother, is Meghan's great-great-aunt. Both Meghan and Mookie are aware of this fact because he played for the Boston Red Sox in the 2019 season when Harry and Meghan watched Yankees versus Red Sox on tour in London. They went to the June 29th, 2019 game and saw him play, and it was in all the papers in Boston. Mookie's actually also much, much richer than Meghan. His 12-year contract with the LA Dodgers is worth $365 million, and he got an upfront additional $65 million signing bonus. Now that he's in LA and extremely wealthy, do you think she ever goes to see her long lost cousin? Do you think Mookie and his high school sweetheart Brianna and their beautiful baby girl Kinley, born in 2018, were invited to Archie's big birthday party? Or do you think Meghan prefers to spin yarns about their totally not plagiarized and made up great 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 grandfather wisdom to guests that wouldn't entertain a 5-year-old at all, like Tyler Perry and Oprah? It's another classic narcissist trait, isn't it? It's only logical that some proportion of today's lies will bite them in the butt tomorrow, but they never see it coming. But back to Harry's slippery, sugary fondant ghost. J.R. Moehringer started working with Harry on Spare when he was 55 years old and wrote this op-ed about it for The New Yorker at 58 years old. So he's most definitely gotten over his need to be liked and validated by the people he's profiling, his confusion over where to draw the line between friend and client, and his bad habit of accepting and perpetuating lies from those who flatter him and meet his emotional needs in the 25 years since he wrote The Champ. Right? Let's listen together so you can decide for yourself if he's really King Kane.
Personal history, published in the print issue of The New Yorker, with the headline The Ghostwriter, written by J.R. Moehringer, read by Eric Jason Martin. I was exasperated with Prince Harry. My head was pounding. My jaw was clenched, and I was starting to raise my voice. And yet some part of me was still able to step outside the situation and think, this is so weird. I'm shouting at Prince Harry.
It's weird that you're shouting at a client, not that the client you're shouting at is Prince Harry.
Then, as Harry started going back at me, as his cheeks flushed and his eyes narrowed, a more pressing thought occurred. Whoa, it could all end right here.
Bravo, you got there in the end.
This was the summer of 2022. For 2 years, I'd been the ghostwriter on Harry's memoir, Spare, and now, reviewing his latest edits in a middle-of-the-night Zoom session, we'd come to a difficult passage.
2 years, and you haven't set any boundaries. This is not appropriate. You both live in the continental United States, so you have a 3-hour time difference at most. Harry does fuck all day, every day, meet during work hours like professionals with boundaries.
Harry, at the close of grueling military exercises in rural England, gets captured by pretend terrorists. It's a simulation, but the tortures inflicted upon Harry are very real. He's hooded, dragged to an underground bunker, beaten, frozen, starved, stripped, forced into excruciating stress positions by captors wearing black balaclavas. The idea is to find out if Harry has the toughness to survive an actual capture on the battlefield. 2 of his fellow soldiers don't, they crack. At last, Harry's captors throw him against a wall, choke him, and scream insults into his face, culminating in a vile dig at Princess Diana? Even the fake terrorists engrossed in their parts, even the hardcore British soldiers observing from a remote location, seem to recognize that an inviolate rule has been broken. Clawing that specific wound, the memory of Harry's dead mother, is out of bounds. When the simulation is over, one of the participants extends an apology. Harry always wanted to end this scene with a thing he said to his captors, a comeback that struck me as unnecessary and somewhat inane. Good for Harry that he had the nerve, but ending with what he said would dilute the scene's meaning. That even at the most bizarre and peripheral moments of his life, his central tragedy intrudes. For months, I'd been crossing out the comeback, and for months, Harry had been pleading for it to go back in. Now he wasn't pleading, he was insisting, and it was 2 a.m., and I was starting to lose it. I said, dude, we've been over this. Why was this one line so important? Why couldn't he accept my advice? We were leaving out 1,000 other things. That's half the art of memoir, leaving stuff out. So what made this different? Please, I said, trust me. Trust the book. Although this wasn't the first time that Harry and I had argued, it felt different. It felt as if we were hurtling towards some kind of decisive rupture, in part because Harry was no longer saying anything. He was just glaring into the camera. Finally, he exhaled and calmly explained that All his life, people had belittled his intellectual capabilities, and this flash of cleverness proved that, even after being kicked and punched and deprived of sleep and food, he had his wits about him. "Oh," I said. "Okay." It made sense now, but I still refused. "Why?" "Because," I told him, "everything you just said is about you. You want the world to know that you did a good job, that you were smart. But, strange as it may seem, memoir isn't about you. It's not even the story of your life. It's a story carved from your life, a particular series of events chosen because they have the greatest resonance for the widest range of people. And at this point in the story, those people don't need to know anything more than that your captors said a cruel thing about your mom."
Okay, let's pause there because we already have layers. Does J.R. Moehringer think that he's required to believe everything Harry says as his ghostwriter? Because I'm having trouble believing this story. How would impoverished Afghani 20-year-olds forced into the Taliban even know who Princess Diana was? Why would any British soldiers impersonating them bring up Princess Diana? This story sounds completely fake to me. And it sounds like Prince Harry made up this story so he could deliver this comeback he also dreamed up. I know they're doing this at 2 in the morning, but how much of the Kool-Aid has J.R. Moehringer drunk? Or even worse, does J.R. Moehringer will know and is mocking Harry to the world while maintaining plausible deniability? He's almost complaining like, you wouldn't believe how many fake dumb comeback stories I had to edit out because this dude has the maturity of a 13-year-old. Beyond that, the juicy tidbit morsel reveal here that all the daily tabs that reviewed this op-ed focused on was that Harry wanted the world to know he's not stupid. Having been a journalist, the ghostwriter knew when he wrote these words that that is what fellow reporters would pull from this. I'm disturbed that he doesn't see the problem with surprise revealing this deep-seated insecurity of Harry's. Revealing the unrevealed, unapproved, and after the fact is not cool. Not cool at all. And the reason why he does it is even worse.
Harry looked down. A long time. Was he thinking? Seething? Should I have been more diplomatic? Should I have just given in? I imagined I'd be thrown off the book soon after sunup. I could almost hear the awkward phone call with Harry's agent, and I was sad. Never mind the financial hit. I was focused on the emotional shock. All the time, the effort, the intangibles I'd invested in Harry's memoir, in Harry, would be gone. Just like that. After what seemed like an hour, Harry looked up, and we locked eyes. "Okay," he said. "Okay? Yes, I get it." "Thank you, Harry," I said, relieved. He shot me a mischievous grin. "I really enjoy getting you worked up like that." I burst into laughter and shook my head, and we moved on to his next set of edits.
J.R. Moehringer, why wasn't it about the money? Why do you need Prince Harry to like you? Do you need all your clients to like you? Do you need them to like you for practical reasons or for personal reasons or for both? It sure sounds like you need the approval of this rich dunce because he's a prince, that's all. He's giving me shades of Meghan's new talent agent, Brad. The guy with all the "I'm my client's #1 fan. When you love your work, it's not work" bluster. It's easy to be a true fan and supporter of a good person who treats you well, but can you honestly be the same for a bad or middling person who treats you poorly? Harry thought it was funny to wind you up at 2 in the morning and you pretended it was funny? The fuck?
I didn't worry so much about the propriety of arguing with princes, or even the risks.
What risks, JR? Is he going to throw you in the dungeon? Are you disinvited from diplomatic luncheons? Oh, don't worry about that. Prince Harry's not invited either.
One of a ghostwriter's main jobs is having a big mouth. You win some, you lose most, but you have to keep pushing, not unlike a demanding parent or a tyrannical coach. Otherwise, you're nothing but a glorified stenographer, and that's disloyalty to the author, to the book, to books.
I wouldn't take it that far. Prince Harry's travails up and down Park Avenue, from limo to yellow cab, back to limo, are hardly the trials of Odysseus.
Opposition is true friendship, William Blake wrote. And if I had to choose a ghostwriting credo, that would be it. No, rather than the rightness of going after Harry, I was questioning the heat with which I'd done so. I scolded myself. It's not your comeback. It's not your mother. For the 1000th time in my ghostwriting career, I reminded myself, it's not your effing book. An author might know nothing about writing, which is why he hired a ghost. But he may also have the literary self-confidence of Saul Bellow, and good luck telling Saul Bellow that he absolutely may not describe an interesting bowel movement he experienced years ago. So fight like crazy, I say. But always remember that if push comes to shove, no one will have your back. Within the text and without, no one wants to hear from the dumb ghostwriter.
As a talented journalist/writer, you resent having to ghostwrite. So the thing you like most about Harry is that he trusted your judgment, or at least bent to your will in the end. Weird power dynamics there.
A lot of what I've read about ghostwriting, much of it from accomplished ghostwriters, doesn't square with my experience. The ghostwriter for Julian Assange wrote 25,000 words about his methodology, and it sounded to me like Elon Musk on mushrooms, on Mars.
He actually didn't. The author Moehringer is referencing is Andrew O'Hagan, whom the New York Times has called the best essayist of his generation. He's the editor-at-large of the London Review of Books, and unlike Harry, Meghan, or Moehringer, an actual long-standing goodwill ambassador for UNICEF. The piece Moehringer is referencing, titled Ghosting, is an account of how Julian Assange signed a $3 million deal for his autobiography and then literally refused to participate in its writing. As in, Assange didn't write a single sentence, but kept promising his ghostwriter he was working on it, like a little kid who pretends to be working on their final school project, but doesn't do anything at all, and then pretends to be sick the night before the presentation. They know they've let people down terribly, people who believe in them and are trying to help them. They know they've been unconscionably selfish. They just don't care. O'Hagan figured Assange out fairly quickly, so he upped the frequency and intensity of interviews with Assange and late nights spent scribbling down Assange's drunk paranoid tirades in order to have something to present to the publisher and not breach his own contract due to Assange's non-performance. Ghosting is not a treatise on ghostwriting methodology. It doesn't attempt to explain how to work with an impossible memoirist or excuse how O'Hagan handled Assange. It's simply the very interesting true story of the writing and publishing of Julian Assange, the unauthorized autobiography. And you know who Assange sounds a lot like? Let's listen to some excerpts and you tell me.
He had a strange on-the-spectrum inability to see when he was becoming boring or demanding. He talked as if the world needed him to talk and never to stop. I have quite abstract thoughts, he said, and an argument about civilization and secrecy that needs to be got down. He stood at the centre of a little amateur empire, and any professional incursions from lawyers, filmmakers, from publishers, all of which he had encouraged, were treated as flies to wanton boys. His pride could engulf the room in flames. And if you asked him why he had no experienced people, nobody in middle age or even elderly, working alongside him, authoritative people with form who might contradict him on a daily basis, he would argue that those people had already been corrupted. He spoke at length about his enemies, mainly The Guardian and the New York Times. He hardly mentioned the right-wing press that called him a criminal and a traitor. He expended all his ire on the journalists who had tried to work with him and who had basic sympathy for his political position. He turned from being very open and engaged to being removed and sort of disgusted. At one point, he looked quite moved as he spoke about backstabbers. Every good story needs a Judas, he said, and nearly everybody is a fucking wanker. In some way, he found it impossible to imagine how another person could have a view of him or of themselves that didn't accord with his own. Julian's favourite activity was following what people, especially his enemies, were saying about him on the internet. When I told him I'd sooner cut my balls off than Google myself, he found a high-minded reason, explaining why he had to know what other people were saying about him. Julian treated his supporters as subjects and learned nothing when they walked away. Before my eyes, and with no regard for me or, indeed, the tape recorder, he snapped the olive branch proffered by people he hated. He appeared to like the notion that he was pursued, and the tendency was only complicated by the fact that he was pursued by some. But the pursuit was never as grave as he wanted it to be. Julian always seemed to have 3 phones on the go at any one time, sometimes 2, always a red one, his personal one. And this latest batch was designed to deal with a general paranoia that the newspapers were hacking all of us. The whole time I worked alongside them, sudden bursts of vigilance would vie with a complete negligence. Julian would speak on open lines sometimes. The others kept the same mobiles for months, and none of them seemed to care about a running tape recorder. Is she checking for paparazzi? I said. I wish, said Julian. What then? Assassins. Quick, quick, he said. Go left. We're being followed. I looked in the rearview mirror and could see a white Mondeo with a wire sticking out the back. Don't be daft, Julian, I said. That's a taxi. No, listen to me. It's surveillance. We're being followed. Quickly, go left. Just by comical chance, as I was rocking a Sweeney-style left handbrake turn, the car behind us suddenly stopped at a farmhouse gate, and a little boy jumped out and ran up the path. I looked at the clock, and we rolled off in a cloud of dust. The clock said 3:48. That was a kid being delivered home from school. I said, you're mental. You don't understand, he said. But he wasn't addressing his own problems or any of his own failures. He was in a state of panic at all times that things might get out. I'm sure this is what happens in so many of his scrapes. He runs on a kind of high-octane belief in his own rectitude and wisdom, only to find later that other people had their own views of what is sound journalism, of what is agreeable sex. It always completely baffles him that he might be complicit in his own mess. I was beginning to wonder about the time wasting. I couldn't understand the slow and lazy way they were going about things. They always talked about the pressure of work, about how busy they were, but compared to most journalists, they sat on their arses half the day. After many of these long nights, I would wonder if the job wasn't getting closer to fiction than I'd ever suspected. I really like the writing and everything, he said, but I can see something that you can't see, which is that my opponents will use this material to undermine me. They will dive on this stuff to say that I'm weak. No, they won't, I said. You can't write an autobiography that merely attempts to second-guess your opponents, Julian. He's the sort of person who's always swimming towards the life raft. I threw him a line. What do you want from this book? Facts, some feelings, but it should be a manifesto. It can have some reflections from childhood and whatever, but the book should be a manifesto of my ideas. It should be like moral essays with a plot. It may turn out that Julian is not, in fact, Daniel Ellsberg or John Wilkes, but Charles Foster Kane, abusive sometimes and monstrous in his pursuit of the truth that interests him, motivated all the while not by high principles, but by a deep, sentimental wound. I've never been with anybody in my life who made me feel so like an adult. And I say that as the father of a 10-year-old child.
So why is Moehringer calling out this piece? Why is he calling it out without naming the piece or the author? Dare I say it's because he's embarrassed about being a sellout and he's speaking directly to other writers? He's suggesting that he's the superior ghostwriter because he was able to properly corral his imbecile memoirist and edit his ramblings into the best-selling autobiography of all time, albeit of very dubitable truthfulness. Instead of losing his narcissistic memoirist in the mix, losing the bag, and writing an extremely interesting piece of nonfiction like O'Hagan.
That same ghost, however, published a review of Spare describing Harry as off his royal tits and me as going all Sartre or Faulkner. So what do I know? Who am I to offer rules? Maybe the alchemy of each ghost author pairing is unique.
And a cowardly backtrack. Shall we listen to exactly what Andrew O'Hagan said about Spare? The title is literally Off His Royal Tits. Here are the excerpts. Quote, journalism for him is a profession opposed to truth. This seems so obvious to him that it acts as a gateway drug to everything else he believes. The art of biography appears to the prince to be a pane of clear glass through which the truth will finally be revealed to the reader. So here it comes, The Corrections by Harry Windsor, a postmodern social novel in which the author will confront the twisted evils that harass civilization and be a living antidote to the poison spread by the Daily Mail. It's an impressive scheme of outrage. Harry's truth is a cartoon strip of saucy entertainments and shouty Jeremiads masquerading as a critique of the establishment, and it simply couldn't be more riveting. His truth, my truth, is much better written than the Mail, though guttling in the same sad bogs on the same dark heaths of human experience. Really funny, though. Truth is everywhere. Truth is relentless. Truth is a noisy neighbor who just swallowed 4 disco biscuits and dragged his sound system into the garden for a bit of a social. What's not to like? Harry will allow no contradiction and no variance. Recollections may vary, the late Queen said, and only when his wider family shows that it deeply appreciates the truth of what he's gone through will reconciliation be possible. Harry says, in his Montecito meets TikTok kind of way, that forgiveness is 100% a possibility and that he's open to helping the royal family understand its own unconscious bias. It must be quite annoying if you're them. You don't have to be Baudrillard to feel that Harry's idea of the truth is simplistic and that he's become a bit of a fundamentalist. Anything that isn't my truth is automatically part of the big lie. Harry has set out to convince the world that his family are professional liars, with 1 or 2 saving graces, such as heavenly anointment, and he's not wrong. There's never been a book like this, with its parceling out of epic, one-sided truths. Most royal biographies, even the lively ones, his mother's, his father's, poor old Crawfey's, were made airless by vapid writing, spurious genuflections before royal protocol, cringing vanity masquerading as public service. Harry does much less of that. There are overshared war experiences, bouts of snotty complaining, daddy issues, mummy issues, brother issues, bedroom size issues, whose palace is it anyway issues, arguments about tiaras, Kate Middleton issues, and Todd you're nearly dropping off in Harley Street issues. Harry notarizes his pees, his poos, his sweat, and his bonks. He can never quite say it out loud, and neither could his Aunt Margaret, but he's pissed about being number 2, and he takes all the unfairness and makes of it a Molotov cocktail. Take that, Camilla! Take that, courtiers and royal correspondents! Take that, Pa, from your darling boy! You can't help agreeing with him half the time. The other half is spent worrying how he'll ever make it through his life as he mistakes his need to end his pain with the need for a global reset. Prince Harry has never read a book in his life, so his ghostwriter, J.R. Moehringer, invites a round of applause every time he goes all Sartre or Faulkner. The latter provides this volume's epigraph. The past is never dead, it's not even past, which Harry reveals he found on some brainy quote site on the web. Who the fuck is Faulkner? And how's he related to us Windsors? It's quite thrilling, Harry as existentialist philosopher, but I was especially pleased with his Heidegger-like handling of the principal problems of time. Could there really be nothing after this? Thinking Harry is now surrounded by the post-colonial writers we saw in his Netflix series, who are pushing him to enact his fantasy of being a standard bearer for reformed racists turned brand ambassadors for what is right, what is fair, and being really sorry about the past. He tells us he cares less than nothing for his ancestors. Even he wouldn't say so, but he has a Republican's heart. He's still trying to prove himself before the world, wielding the wooden sword, being patriotic, sticking up for the Queen and his mother country. But the truths unfurled in his book can only reveal the spurious nature of these things. The press is only as powerful as Harry allows it to be. It's his monster, and he gives it oxygen. If you're Harry, it takes genius to be ordinary, and he's only halfway there, still agitating for approval. In his account of the years of his trauma, he mentions nothing about what was actually happening in Britain, noticing not one thing about the conditions under which people live. He seems not to know that when it comes to Afghanistan, he is writing about what millions of people feel to be an unjust holy war, and it was insane of moehringer not to tell him so. The book makes it clear that Harry has been treated badly, but it also makes clear he thinks about nothing else. It would displease the prince to think so, but his book's main contribution to the jollity of nations is journalistic. His truths won't change the royal family, and they won't bring media fairness. They will fill the papers, though, for a few months, and will add brilliant detail to an already very baroque picture. British journalism should give him an award for services to the industry in a difficult year. Scalding hot burn, no lies detected. I don't think there's any coming back from that, but nice try, JR, nice try.
Andre Agassi and I were very different, but our connection was instant. He had a list of questions. He asked why my memoir was so confessional. I told him that's how you know you can trust an author, if he's willing to get raw.
Did Harry get raw, or just as Todger?
He asked why I'd organized my memoir around other people rather than myself. I told him that was the kind of memoir I admired. There's so much power to be gained, and honesty to be achieved, from taking an ostensibly navel-gazing genre and turning the gaze outward. I am a part of all that I have met. At some point I shared that line from Tennyson, and Andre loved it.
Convince your dumb author to betray everyone in their life with this one simple trick.
But how, he asked, do you write about other people without invading their privacy? That's the ultimate challenge, I said. I sought permission from nearly everyone I wrote about, and shared early drafts, but sometimes people aren't speaking to you, and sometimes they're dead.
Did you recommend this to Harry, JR? Because he acted like a liar and a coward and did not send anybody in the book advance copies. So his entire family, all his ex-girlfriends, and various other identifiable figures of his past got to read it at the very same time as the general public.
Sometimes, in order to tell the truth, you simply can't avoid hurting someone's feelings. It goes down easier, I said, if you're equally unsparing about yourself.
So is that why Harry told all of these super embarrassing stories? He was trying to assuage his own guilt for spewing all this bullshit about his family?
Apart from a beef with my bosses, and apart from the money, Andre was offering a sizable bump from my reporter's salary, what finally made me change my no to a yes was the sense that Andre was suffering an intense and specific ache that I might be able to cure. He wanted to tell his story, and didn't know how. I'd been there. I'd struggled for years to tell my story. Every attempt failed, and every failure took a heavy psychic toll. Some days it felt like a physical blockage, and to this day I believe my story would have remained stuck inside me forever, if not for one editor at the Times, who on a Sunday afternoon imparted some thunderbolt advice about memoir that steered me onto the right path. I wanted to give Andre that same grace.
Thanks for not sharing the thunderbolt advice that changed your life. That was not selfish and weird of you to dangle like a carrot at all. Also, a physical blockage? Jeepers creepers. You're telling us just enough to make us disgusted, but not enough to resolve that simile. I posit that the reason it was so hard to get your story out is because your life isn't terribly interesting and you still haven't mastered introspection. Moehringer wrote his memoir at the age of 40. It's called The Tender Bar. It was published in 2005. We got the beginning of the story in those excerpts from The Champ. He was raised in a working class Irish, Italian Catholic neighborhood of Long Island, a New York City bedroom community, by his earnest secretary of a mother and his intelligent but uneducated bartender of an uncle after his father abandoned their nuclear family. He studied hard, he got into Yale, he dated a rich girl there who married someone else. He became a reporter, he worked at the Times, who fired him, and then he wrote a memoir about it. It was actually optioned by George Clooney, made into a film that premiered in 2022 on Amazon Prime, starring Ben Affleck as the bartender uncle. You know how Ben Affleck likes to cosplay working class? I guess he can get away with it in a Boston dialect, but his attempt at a Long Island accent was garbage.
Wow, it's kind of a last straw kind of thing, you know. First big blot on her ledger. You gotta be able to do without people. They gotta know it. Either all in or nothing.
Is that a lazy De Niro impression of some sort? Wasn't he married to J-Lo at the time? May I?
Wow, it's kind of a last straw kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of a last straw kind of a thing, you know?
First big blot on her ledger.
Not exactly the first ink blot on her ledger.
You gotta be able to do without people. They gotta know it.
You gotta be able to do without people, and they gotta know it.
Either all in or nothing.
It's either all in or nothing. Thank you very much. I'll be accepting my Ms. Foundation Award for Women of Vision at the dumpster behind the Pastrami Queen on 78th and Lex.
The collaboration was so close, so synchronous, you'd have to call the eventual voice of the memoir a hybrid, though it's all Andre. Reviewers were complimentary, and I soon had offers to ghost other people's memoirs. I switched on the TV. There was Andre, on a late-night talk show. The host was praising Open, and Agassi was being his typical charming, humble self. Now the host was praising the writing. Agassi continued to be humble. Thank you, thank you. But I dared to hope he might mention me? An indefensible, illogical hope. Andre had asked me to put my name on the cover, and I'd declined. Nevertheless, right before zonking out, I started muttering at the TV. Say my name. I got a bit louder. Say my name. I got pretty rowdy. Say my fucking name. NyQuil was to blame, but also creeping narcissism. The gods were admonishing me. You can't be Mr. Rogers while ghosting the book, and John McEnroe when it's done. I'm not cut out for this ghostwriting thing. I needed to get back to my first love, journalism, and to writing my own books.
Aw, that was 11 years before he wrote Spare.
During the next year or so, I freelanced for magazines while making notes for a novel. The novel was historical fiction, based on the decades-long crime spree of America's most prolific bank robber, but also based on my disgust with the bankers who had recently devastated the global financial system. In real life, my bank-robbing protagonist wrote a memoir with a ghostwriter, which was full of lies or delusions. I thought it might be fascinating to override that memoir with solid research, overwrite the ghostwriter, and become, in effect, the ghostwriter of the ghostwriter of a ghost.
Interesting. Is that kind of what I'm doing right now with you, JR?
I gave everything I had to that novel. But when it was published, in 2012, it got mauled by an influential critic. The review was then instantly tweeted by countless humanitarians, often with side-splitting commentary like, ouch. I was on book tour at the time, and read the review in a pitch-dark hotel room, knowing full well what it meant. The book was stillborn. I couldn't breathe, couldn't stand. Part of me wanted to never leave that room. Part of me never did.
This is an interesting parallel with Harry. Harry doesn't see his bad behavior as the problem. He sees social media chatting about his bad behavior as the problem. Likewise, JR doesn't see his bad writing as the problem. He sees social media mocking his bad writing as a problem. Do you want to hear the review? Shall I read you more excerpts? I'm pretty sure the review he is referring to is Dwight Garner of the New York Times. The review is titled, He Knew Where the Money Was and He Usually Took It, which would also be a good title for a review of Spare or Profile of J.R. Moehringer. There are two ways to read Sutton by J.R. Moehringer, as a third-rate novel with a deep and crippling cornball streak, or as a loose and journalistic speculative biography of a famous bank robber. Either way you lose, but you lose less if you decide to read it as semi-true biography. You can at least enjoy the ragtime shuffle of the author's better sentences. In the overselling style that characterizes Sutton, which is billed as a novel, Mr. Moehringer declaims about his hero, smarter than Machine Gun Kelly, saner than Pretty Boy Floyd, more likable than Legs Diamond, more peaceable than Dutch Schultz, more romantic than Bonnie and Clyde. Sutton saw bank robbery as high art and went about it with an artist's single-minded zeal. That's not the sound fiction makes. That's the sound jacket copy makes. A better title for this novel might have been, had Willie Nelson not already taken it for his own 2007 book, The Tao of Willie. You can open to almost any page of Sutton and find our hero uttering things like, hold on for dear life, boys. When time tries to snatch something from you, just grab tighter, don't let go. Or, more puzzlingly, did you ever notice, kid, that the words obit and orbit are separated by one little letter? It's like listening to Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade after slight brain damage from a stroke. Footnote, did Moehringer not copy this rhythm in his attempt to insult Andrew O'Hagan? I believe the phrase he used was Elon Musk on mushrooms on Mars. Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade after slight brain damage from a stroke. Continuing. Nearly everyone in Sutton talks like this. It's a novel with not one but two whores with hearts of gold. Characters blurt thesis statements from out of nowhere. Here's a photographer explaining why readers care about Sutton's story. This is the age of the anti-hero. I don't have to tell you, Willie. Times are hard. People are fed up. A hooker arrives to underscore this book's populist anti-Wall Street themes. Wall Street, Willie, she says. They're a bad bunch. She adds, I know who I am, what I am, and as such, I'll take a sailor over an investment banker any day. Sutton's young girlfriend's wealthy and disapproving father says, none of us knows what bad luck is or where it comes from. Maybe it's wild and random, like the wind. Mr. Moehringer gets some good things said in Sutton. I liked the bit where Sutton talks about how criminals, like Broadway actors, can't wait to seize upon their notices in the next morning's newspapers. The bad reviews, we took those hard, Sutton says. If the cops said the robbery looked like the work of amateurs, we go into a funk for a week. There's also this line about a conundrum that faces Sutton. What would Ben Franklin do if offing a dwarf were the only way to be happy? And there's Sutton's comment about life outside of prison in 1969. When exactly, he asks, did everybody get together and decide to stop getting haircuts? But Sutton has little of the depth, nuance, or graininess of real fiction. Reading it is like watching a man confidently paint the exterior walls of a house while completely forgetting to do the interiors. A man has to feel good at something or he's not a man, Willie Sutton says in one of the many bromides that pack this novel. Mr. Moehringer is very good at many things. Fiction is not yet one of them. End quote. Oh my gosh, these other writers are burning up J.R. Moehringer. It really does make you wonder, is Moehringer himself so shallow he really thought that Harry read as a sympathetic, to use one of Meghan's favorite words, layered personality in Spare? Does he think so little of the readership that he believes he has to write in cliché? Or is this his twisted way of making sure we say his name this time? He thought he could win against a previous ghostwriter in the portrayal of Willie Sutton, and he thought he could get away with portraying Harry as Lord Haw Haw, trusting that Harry's too dense to perceive it.
An actor an activist, a billionaire, a soldier, a politician, another billionaire, a lunatic, would phone, seeking help with a memoir. Twice I said yes, not for the money. I've never taken a ghosting gig for the money. But twice I felt that I had no choice, that the story was too cool, the author just too compelling, and twice the author freaked out at my first draft. Twice I explained that first drafts are always flawed, that error is the mother of truth, but it wasn't just the errors. It was the confessions, the revelations, the cold-blooded honesty that memoir requires. Everyone says they want to get raw until they see how raw feels. Twice the author killed the book. Twice I said to my wife, never again. And then, in the summer of 2020, I got a text. I agreed to a Zoom. I was curious, of course. Who wouldn't be? I wondered what the real story was. I wondered if we'd have any chemistry. We did. And there was, I think, a surprising reason. Princess Diana had died 23 years before our first conversation, and my mother, Dorothy Moehringer, had just died, and our griefs felt equally fresh.
Oh my fucking God, stop! Why can we not let this woman rest in peace? 23 years! 23 years! That is not fresh grief. That is an emotional disorder. Oh.
Still, I hesitated. Harry wasn't sure how much he wanted to say in his memoir, and that concerned me.
Moehringer is framing this as relating to and having chemistry with his authors, and he may even believe that. But what I see is an opportunist cherry-picking the most vulnerable famous people with the most scandalous stories to tell.
I knew that whatever Harry said, whenever he said it, would set off a storm. I am not, by nature, a storm chaser.
Thou doth protest too much.
I just liked the dude. I called him dude right away. It made him chuckle. I found his story, as he outlined it in broad strokes, relatable.
Being raised third in line to the British throne, so relatable.
And infuriating. The way he'd been treated, by both strangers and intimates, was grotesque.
I would not call a home in various royal palaces, free Land Rovers, round-the-clock security, the best education and healthcare money can buy, promotions into army ranks he wouldn't have otherwise received thanks to his grandmother, a tax-free £3 million per year allowance with no strings attached thanks to his daddy, the use of palace chefs, if he so wished, the use of bespoke tailors and shoemakers, if he so wished, dating the prettiest, most eligible girls in the UK, an endless waiting list of successful, brilliant, wealthy, famous people hoping to get into your social circle, willing to accept whatever shitty friendship you're able to offer, everyone pretending you're funny when you're not, pretending you're smart when you're not, pretending you're right when you're not, pretending you're good looking when you're not, covering up your bad behavior, never asking you to apologize for anything, and knowing you'll never get fired from your job. Grotesque treatment. Would you? Is that grotesque to you? What would you trade for that grotesque treatment?
In retrospect, though, I think I selfishly welcomed the idea of being able to speak with someone, an expert, about that never-ending feeling of wishing you could call your mom.
An expert? Spare me, JR. You can afford a psychiatrist. Furthermore, he was a 12-year-old boy. You are a 56-year-old man. I find it grotesque that people raised in the working class by struggling parents are so eager to make apologies for the most privileged assholes imaginable in exchange for the chance, not even the actuality, just the 1 in a million chance that Prince or Princess Pity Party will acknowledge they exist.
Harry and I made steady progress in the course of 2020, largely because the world didn't know what we were up to. We could revel in the privacy of our Zoom bubble. As Harry grew to trust me, he brought other people into the bubble, connecting me with his inner circle, a vital phase in every ghosting job. There is always someone who knows your author's life better than he does, and your task is to find that person fast and interview his socks off. As the pandemic waned, I was finally able to travel to Montecito.
There is certainly not anyone who knows Harry's life better than he does in Montecito, California. He's lived there for 2 years. Who did you interview? His wife? His mother-in-law? The nanny? Ellen's wife? What the?
I went once with my wife and children. Harry won the heart of my daughter, Gracie, with his vast Moana scholarship. His favorite scene, he told her, is when Hey, the silly chicken, finds himself lost at sea. I also went twice by myself. Harry put me up in his guest house, where Meghan and Archie would visit me on their afternoon walks.
So I understand there's a lot of value in visiting your subject in their natural habitat, seeing where they live, seeing how they live, knowing their daily schedule, knowing the people they consort with. 3 trips is excessive, and it shouldn't require staying with them as their guest. That smacks of attempts to cultivate real or fake friendship on both sides. On the other hand, this is a memoir, it's not a medical study. Personally, I wouldn't want to stay with my author. I prefer having space, perspective, privacy. What do you think? Do you think this is acceptable?
Meghan, knowing I was missing my family, was forever bringing trays of food and sweets.
I wonder if she is a good hostess. To me, a good hostess is someone who just says, look, lunch is served at 1, dinner's at 7:30. If you're hungry, come around. If you're not or you're busy, no offense taken. I wonder what kind of arrangement they had.
Little by little, Harry and I amassed hundreds of thousands of words. When we weren't Zooming or phoning, we were texting around the clock. In due time, no subject was off the table. I felt honored by his candor, and I could tell that he felt astonished by it, and energized.
It sounds like they're chatting on a dating app, doesn't it?
While I always emphasized storytelling and scenes, Harry couldn't escape the wish that Spare might be a rebuttal to every lie ever published about him. As Borges dreamed of endless libraries, Harry dreams of endless retractions, which meant no end of revelations. He knew, of course, that some people would be aghast at first. Why on earth would Harry talk about that? But he had faith that they would soon see, because someone else already talked about it and got it wrong. He was joyful at this prospect. Everything in our bubble was good.
So Andrew O'Hagan's calling it the corrections by Harry Windsor is completely accurate, is what you're saying.
Then someone leaked news of the book. Whoever it was, their callousness toward Harry extended to me. I had a clause in my contract giving me the right to remain unidentified, a clause I always insist on. But the leaker blew that up by divulging my name to the press.
Cui bono? No one at the publishers, for fear of getting caught and fired. Not your wife, assuming she's sane for the same reason. Who else would even know you were writing this? I'm assuming whatever buddies you have at whatever clubs you belong to wouldn't bother with this because your name isn't particularly valuable inside information. Leaving me with Meghan. Meghan was the leaker. She wanted to try to scare the royal family into letting her have her way, and she loves bullying people through the press so she can pretend it wasn't her. Maybe she was starting to get jealous of your round-the-clock texting and teary phone calls about mom. Narcissistic abusers are extremely territorial over their supply. Another clue that Meghan was the leak? The first article about this in the Daily Mail was published July 19th, 2021. Quote, the book is being ghostwritten by J.R. Moehringer, a Pulitzer Prize winner who previously co-wrote tennis legend Andre Agassi's autobiography. A first draft is almost completed and is due to be submitted in October. Prince Harry will be donating proceeds to charity, said the publisher. End quote. Whatever happened to that donation? These initial articles on July 19th forced the publisher, Penguin Random House, to issue an official statement via press release and on Twitter the very same day. Quote, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, will publish a literary memoir with Penguin Random House globally in late 2022. July 19, 2021. Penguin Random House is honored to announce that it will publish a forthcoming memoir by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, an intimate and heartfelt memoir from one of the most fascinating and influential global figures of our time. Prince Harry will share for the very first time the definitive account of the experiences, adventures, losses, and life lessons that have helped shape him. Prince Harry will offer an honest and captivating personal portrait, one that shows readers that behind everything they think they know lies an inspiring, courageous, and uplifting human story. End quote. All the pundits predictably started weighing in, as did the Twitterverse, to the extent that this royal adjacent factoid was attached to completely unrelated articles. For example, July 20th, 2021, going for gold, Prince William beams as he meets Team GB boxer Lauren Price at Kensington Palace ahead of Tokyo 2020 Olympics, as brother Harry announces bombshell new book. Just two completely unrelated things. But that wasn't enough for H&M. They had to up the ante. So the very next day, July 20th, they set off another bomb. The Daily Mail article is titled, Prince Harry says he doesn't need Queen's permission to write $20 million Megxit memoir as royal aides fear more truth bombs and poor me introspection in tell-all book by Harry, written by Meghan. Quote, Prince Harry didn't feel he needed permission from Buckingham Palace to write his $20 million Megxit memoir, his spokesman declared today. Harry scrambled to contact his family only when he knew the story was coming out, just moments before it became public. End quote. In the Daily Mail alone, there were 13 articles at least mentioning the memoir published between July 19th and July 22nd, 2 published on July 22nd, a further 8 published between July 23rd and July 26th when the drama finally died down. And that's just the Mail. Obviously, there are hundreds more papers, websites, TV shows, blogs, all around the world. So why is July 22nd significant? That's a lot of drama to unfold in the 48 hours before little Prince George's birthday. His birthday is July 22nd, and that's when Meghan the Snake traditionally strikes. 48 hours-ish before what should be a nice occasion for someone in the royal family. If there's a birthday, anniversary, very important appearance or speech, you can set your watch to it. Meghan will try to ruin it for them 24 to 48 hours prior. I used to joke around like, Harry, the call is coming from inside the house. But I've come to believe that Harry is in on it. He's always been in on it. He's just as bad as she is.
Along with pretty much anyone who has had anything to do with Harry, I woke one morning to find myself squinting into a gigantic searchlight. Every hour, another piece would drop, each one wrong. My fee was wrong. My bio was wrong. Even my name.
Why do you care so much if they were right or wrong, JR? I thought you wanted to remain a ghost. Sure, sounds like the name thing is still really bothering you.
One royal expert cautioned that, because of my involvement in the book, Harry's father should be looking for a pile of coats to hide under. When I mentioned this to Harry, he stared. Why? Because I have daddy issues. We laughed and got back to discussing our mothers.
The utter weirdness and overstepping in this sentence. Why are you complaining to your author? Why are you talking about your mother and your father to your author? Is this the real trick to ghostwriting? Convincing your author that you are in their emotional control, that you rely on them, defer to them, trust their opinion and advice in all things, value everything they drool out at 1:30 a.m. in almost illegible text message, desperately need them to like you and will write anything for them in exchange for a free guest house on a Montecito estate, if possible?
The genesis of my relationship with Harry was constantly misreported. Harry and I were introduced by George Clooney, the British newspapers proclaimed, even though I've never met George Clooney. Yes, he was directing a film based on my memoir, but I've never been in the man's presence, never communicated with him in any way. I wanted to correct the record, write an op-ed or something, tweet some facts, but no. I reminded myself, ghosts don't speak. One day, though, I did share my frustration with Harry. I bemoaned that these fictions about me were spreading and hardening into orthodoxy. He tilted his head. "Welcome to my world, dude." By now, Harry was calling me dude.
Oh, you're still complaining? Are you seriously trying to convince us, post gratuitous George Clooney name drop, that you not only have joined the cool, popular, famous people victim club, but that we should feel bad for you about that?
A week before its pub date, Spare was leaked. A Madrid bookshop reportedly put embargoed copies of the Spanish version on its shelves by accident, and reporters descended. In no time, Fleet Street had assembled crews of translators to reverse engineer the book from Spanish to English, and with so many translators working on tight deadline, the results read like bad Borat. One example among many was the passage about Harry losing his virginity. Per the British press, Harry recounts, "I mounted her quickly." But of course he doesn't. I can assert with 100% confidence that no one gets mounted, quickly or otherwise, in Spare. I didn't have time to be horrified. When the book was officially released, the bad translations didn't stop. They multiplied. The British press now converted the book into their native tongue, that jabberwocky of bonkers hot takes and classist snark.
Ooh, this is not the way. As of this recording, the Daily Mail already has published an article titled, J.R. Moehringer's 7,000-word whinge suggests Harry's ghostwriter is as thin-skinned as the prickly prince himself! !
Facts were wrenched out of context. Complex emotions were reduced to cartoonish idiocy. Innocent passages were hyped into outrages. And there were so many falsehoods.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention for a moment. Are you talking about the translations, the interpretations, your writing, or Harry's truth?
One British newspaper chased down Harry's flight instructor. Headline, Prince Harry's army instructor says story in Spare book is complete fantasy. Hours later, the instructor posted a lengthy comment beneath the article, swearing that those words, complete fantasy, never came out of his mouth. Indeed, they were nowhere in the piece, only in the bogus headline, which had gone viral. The newspaper had made it up, the instructor said, stressing that Harry was one of his finest students. The only other time I'd witnessed this sort of frenzied mob was with LeBron James, whom I'd interviewed before and after his decision to leave the Cleveland Cavaliers and join the Miami Heat. I couldn't fathom the toxic cloud of hatred that trailed him. Fans, particularly Cavs loyalists, didn't just decry James. They wished him dead.
Hold up. Headline, Prince Harry's army instructor says story in Spare book is complete fantasy is not the same as wanting anyone dead. Do you hear yourself?
They burned his jersey, threw rocks at his image, and the media egged them on.
Oh, I see. That was just a nonsensical segue into you bad-mouthing the industry that pays people to do your job, that has fed you and your family for the past 40 years, including this op-ed we're both living right now. Got it.
In those first days of Spare, I found myself wondering what the ecstatic contempt for Prince Harry and King James had in common. Racism, surely.
Are you fucking kidding me? In the year 2022, 71.8% of NBA players were Black, 10.8% were Asian or mixed, 17.4% were white. Over a quarter of NBA teams don't have a single white starter. Just stop. Seriously. J.R. Moehringer, I thought race baiting was beneath you.
Also, each man had committed the sin of publicly spurning his homeland. But the biggest factor, I came to believe, was money. In times of great economic distress, many people are triggered by someone who has so much, doing anything to try to improve his lot.
First of all, don't co-opt and misuse the psychological term trigger for your nefarious purposes. It's disgusting. People who don't like H&M are not irrational. They dislike them for very obvious, real, researchable reasons. And you should know that if you were any kind of journalist worth your salt. Secondly, no one cares if rich people better themselves. People don't like it when the extremely wealthy, extremely privileged, extremely loud-mouthed among us demand their pity, demand to be treated like victims, demand that everybody else let all their shittiness slide due to that victimhood. How, in any of this, did H&M try to better themselves? Please tell me how. They tried to enrich themselves. That is a different thing. Enriching oneself is far less noble than your ambiguously phrased bettering one's lot, and it's completely unacceptable when you do it at the dire expense of other people, inflicting immense suffering on those who love you most. Prince Harry's grandparents, Queen and Prince Philip, died before he backtracked on his accusations in that Oprah interview. People who hate Harry for that are not psychologically triggered into irrational thought by feelings of jealousy. They're completely, legitimately, harshly judging and criticizing his character, his total lack of integrity, his utter lack of empathy for anyone but himself.
Within days, the amorphous campaign against Spare seemed to narrow to a single point of attack: that Harry's memoir, rigorously fact-checked, was rife with errors.
Sorry, by amorphous campaign against Spare, are you suggesting that there was a coordinated denunciation of Spare of any kind? Because there wasn't. There were people laughing at Harry's laughable stories expressed in your laughable writing. Have we hit sugar bingo yet? We've got paranoia over non-existent threats of violence, race baiting, journalists claiming all media except him are blood-sucking liars, and all facts except his are lies. You're all just jealous because we're rich. And now there's a coordinated conspiracy against us. Is that bingo? What else is on the sugar card?
I can't think of anything that rankles quite like being called sloppy by people who routinely trample facts in pursuit of their royal prey. And this now happened every few minutes to Harry, and by extension to me.
Can it? Stop it with the false victimhood. This is the reason people thought you quit and Meghan wrote this book, because of the dumb use of words like royal prey. Ew. They're just reviewing a book. Right or wrong, they're talking about it and your book is selling. Shut up.
In one section of the book, for instance, Harry reveals that he used to live for the yearly sales at TK Maxx, the discount clothing chain. "Not so fast," said the monarchists at TK Maxx Corporate, who rushed out a statement declaring that TK Maxx never has sales, just great savings all the time. Oh, snap. Gotcha, Prince George Santos. Except that people around the world immediately posted screenshots of TK Maxx touting sales on its official Twitter account. Surely TK Maxx's effort to discredit Harry's memoir was unrelated to the company's long-standing partnership with Prince Charles and his charitable trust.
This is unreal. You honestly think Prince Charles and his team decided the most effective way to undermine Prince Harry and Spare was to call in a favor at TK Maxx Corporate and have them tweet about the store's year-round low prices? Or are you suggesting everyone at TK Maxx is such a KC3 stan, they're coming out of their own accord to discredit Harry? Don't you think it's far more likely they tweeted about their everyday low prices to get people in the stores now, fast, today? Quote, "Whilst we're delighted Prince Harry is a big fan, we don't actually do sales. Instead, we offer great value, style, and savings all year round." End quote. Yes, the people jumping on this without doing a cursory review of TK Maxx's previous tweets are idiots who missed the point or deliberately missed the point. But you, Pulitzer Prize winning J.R. Moehringer, choosing this example to defend yourself on just shows that, like H&M, you're very eager to paint all of your critics as stupid, hateful trolls while assiduously avoiding addressing the reasonable criticism of intelligent readers.
Ghostwriters don't speak, I reminded myself over and over. But I had to do something.
Is your ego that big and that bruised? Or are you still on H&M's payroll?
So I ventured one small gesture. I retweeted a few quotes from Mary Karr about inadvertent error in memories and memoir, plus seemingly innocuous quotes from Spare about the way Harry's memory works.
Okay, so first let's take a look at the Mary Karr line he tweeted. Quote, "The line between memory and fact is blurry between interpretation and fact. There are inadvertent mistakes of those kinds out the wazoo," end quote. This seems to be excusing Harry for his lies, blaming them on faulty memory, and supporting the notion that lies as egregious as Harry's are relatively commonplace. What he's leaving out is the most important thing Mary Karr has to say about this phenomenon, what she has said in every single interview about her book, The Art of Memoir. The necessity of telling people when you really can't remember, when you're trying your hardest, but you're not sure you're exactly right.
You're really big on truth telling. Spend a lot of time on telling the truth, and you feel that if memoirists aren't going to tell the truth, they should be honest about it and say, I'm not sure, or I'm fudging things a little bit. Are you? How do you respond when you read a memoir that seems to kind of play fast and loose with the truth? So I'm not asking you to name names, but why does that bother you? Because some people might say, oh, I can embellish.
No, I mean, it's none of my business. I mean, that's what I mean when I say I'm not the boss of it. I mean, you can do it. You can choose your own way to do it, and people have. For me personally, I just found if I could make stuff up, I would never have kind of looked at the painful or difficult things that wound up really being the emotional hearts of my own books. I would just make up that I was like a really nice person and everybody else was a jerk in that, traditional Christian fashion. No, I mean, I just would, for me, the truth lies buried. And if you give yourself an excuse not to look at it, I mean, you don't have to be a memoirist to know this. I mean, anybody with a big inner life knows that often you have to wrestle with yourself to get underneath the easy assumptions.
Yeah, and it's easy to write something that's just not true. I mean, you can embellish, but I think it is harder to get at the kind of real emotional truth, which is what you're getting at.
All the memoirists I know, and I have known some of the great ones, Jeffrey and Tobias Wolff, Maxine Hahn Kingston, Catherine Harrison I mentioned, Maya Angelou. I mean, they all wrote out of a real, almost a kind of despair to try to understand a difficult period. So they were kind of driven toward the truth, and the truth was the goal. So I think most people are driven to nonfiction. Again, there's a woman who said, these books are about 83% true. That's perfectly fine, but I think it's great to tell the reader. If it's okay, then just tell the reader. Don't be kind of vague and try to cast aspersions on the whole genre.
Hear that, JR? Don't try to be vague and cast aspersions on the whole genre.
All memoirs live and die, I think, based 100% on voice. Finding that voice really grows out of finding that tractor beam of truth inside yourself. So, I mean, you don't have to be an art monster, as someone once called Nabokov. We live in an age where all our external sources of authority, the church or science or the government or these great heroes who are our presidents, as those icons have fallen, subjectivity has a new authority. There's something about saying, I don't know what really happened, but this is what I remember. that I think readers trust now more than somebody coming to them saying, I have the capital T truth about an event. I think those things have driven memoir in this century into the light and broadened the readership for them.
I agree with her. People have more leeway to get things wrong than they used to, but our bullshit detectors are also much more finely tuned. People can tell when you're trying to take advantage, and labeling nastiness my truth rather than the truth doesn't cut it. H&M underestimate the intelligence and intuition of everyone but themselves so substantially and so frequently, it truly is a marvel. The average person never finds themselves asking, is that spurious claim true or not? We find ourselves asking, are they making this spurious claim for pathological or strategic reasons today? When we thought it was purely pathological, Meghan the monster narc and Harry her maybe BPD victim, that was far more forgivable than what we've witnessed over the last 2 years, where every move seems to be part of a bitter, vengeful, self-serving strategy.
He can't recall much from the years right after his mother died, and for the most part remembers places better than people, possibly because places didn't let him down the way people did.
Okay, JR, let's read the salient quote from Spare you thought best to illustrate Harry's weakness, excuse it, hopefully garner empathy for him. Supposedly, quote, whatever the cause, my memory is my memory. It does what it does, gathers and curates as it sees fit. And there's just as much truth in what I remember and how I remember it as there is in so-called objective facts. Things like chronology and cause and effect are often just fables we tell ourselves about the past. End quote. Let's explore Zen koan together. One day, Chongzi and a friend were walking by a river. Look at the fish swimming about, said Chongzi. They're really enjoying themselves. You are not a fish, replied the friend, so you can't truly know that they're enjoying themselves. You are not me, said Chongzi. So how do you know I don't know the fish are enjoying themselves? Emotional validation is really important, especially for children, especially from loved ones, and it sounds like Harry didn't get enough of it. To quote Crystalline Salter's Pedno, writing for Very Well Mind, quote, when we're taught from a very young age that our opinions, feelings, and perspectives are not valid, or we're gaslit and led to question our reality, it's hard to accept, honor, and even sometimes feel our emotions as we get older. End quote. Your feelings, a priori, are valid, but that doesn't make them true. Receiving emotional validation does not require everyone in the world to acknowledge your falsehood as fact. They have their own falsehoods. We all do. There's always my truth, your truth, and the truth. Harry seems to think that because he feels it, it's true. Harry's saying there's just as much truth in what I remember and how I remember it as there is in so-called objective facts is not correct. You cannot conflate or confuse emotional validation with simple fact-checking. This confusion or conflation is revealed in the very next line. Things like chronology and cause and effect are often just fables we tell ourselves about the past. No. Cause and effect is an interpretation and therefore perhaps a fable. Chronology is not. Your father was born before you were born. That's chronology. It's a fact. The end. I honestly don't think Moehringer was even trying to defend Harry with this stuff. I think he was trying to stir some shit, sell some books, but still be able to save face if Harry called him on it. But that's my truth. Of course, Moehringer has his truth. Maybe the extra book sales were a pleasant side effect, but he has no back end, so he actually doesn't care. And he really just wanted to get in the mix to sell more of his own memoir or build his own social media following. And then, of course, in the middle, there's the objective, fact-checkable truth. J.R. Moehringer posted this for attention. This isn't a photo dump from his vacation 7 years ago that he wanted to preserve without paying for iCloud storage. It's a topical, timely communication.
Smooth move, Ghostwriter. My tweets were seized upon, deliberately misinterpreted by trolls, and turned into headlines by real news outlets. Harry's Ghostwriter admits the book is all lies.
Deliberately misinterpreted by trolls? Sounds like your truth, not the truth.
One of Harry's friends gave a book party. My wife and I attended. We were feeling fragile as we arrived, and it had nothing to do with Twitter. Days earlier, we'd been stalked, followed in our car as we drove our son to preschool. When I lifted him out of his seat, a paparazzo leaped from his car and stood in the middle of the road, taking aim with his enormous lens and scaring the hell out of everyone at drop-off.
Make sure it didn't happen. I have scoured the internet for this paparazzi photo and cannot find it. I cannot find any paparazzi photos of J.R. Moehringer taken by anyone. Just your typical posing with fans at a book signing, portrait for an op-ed, contributor file photo, and a few from step and repeats related to the Tender Bar movie and a Resurrecting the Champ premiere party. That article was optioned and made into a movie as well. He's not famous. Whatever renown he does have is not for his looks. So there's no reason for paparazzi to photograph him, and they don't. Furthermore, there are no paparazzi where he lives. He lives in Berkeley, California. The cheapest round trip ticket from LA to Berkeley is around $250. That's not counting the extra checked luggage fees you need when you bring heavy, delicate camera equipment. It would cost somebody $500 to go up there, take a picture, and come back, even if they didn't stay overnight. A J.R. Moehringer paparazzi photo set will not sell for $500. It's not worth it. No one did this. If you can find or you have seen this photo, let me know in the comments below. I swear I spent an hour and a half looking everywhere. I think he's lying. And I'm pretty disturbed that an almost 60-year-old man of some repute agrees with Prince Harry that getting popped is a status symbol, but then also pretends he doesn't want to be popped. The whole thing is disturbing.
Then, not 1 hour later, as I sat at my desk, trying to calm myself, I looked up to see a woman's face at my window. As if in a dream, I walked to the window and asked, "Who are you?" Through the glass, she whispered, "I'm from the Mail on Sunday." I lowered the shade, phoned an old friend, the same friend whose columns I used to ghostwrite in Colorado. He listened, but didn't get it. How could he get it?
That seems odd behavior for someone who worked as a journalist for a couple decades and knows all about having to stalk people for a story. If it were me, first of all, I'd laugh and immediately say, "This is off the record. Repeat it back to me that I am off the record. Thanks. Walk around to the front door. You can leave your camera and tape recorder in the hall until I say otherwise. And then when they're ready, what story are you looking for? How much will you pay?" I think that's more or less what actually happened. Perhaps the journalist never even came to him. He might have called her to make arrangements. A very suspicious article appeared in the October 15th, 2022 Mail on Sunday, which is around the original intended release date of Harry's book, written in a voice that sounds, shall we say, familiar. Who do you think wrote this story, or at least was every single source quoted in it? Charles Beware, Pulitzer Prize-winning ghostwriter J.R. Moehringer, whose forte is dissecting broken father and son relationships, has just finished Prince Harry's £40 million memoir. When tennis great Andre Agassi sat down with a ghostwriter for his memoirs, he had no idea how exhaustive and mentally grueling the process would be. The former Wimbledon champion had faced tough opponents in his time, but the ghost in question, J.R. Moehringer, was simply formidable. The writer spent more than 250 hours with the star and even moved to Las Vegas to be near him. He delved so deeply into Agassi and his family background that the player later compared it to being on a psychiatrist's couch for days at a time. Now, the 57-year-old author is putting the finishing touches to what one acquaintance described as the book of his lifetime, Prince Harry's eagerly anticipated tell-all memoir. If Agassi's experience is anything to go by, the Duke of Sussex's book is set to deliver bombshell after bombshell, and on one subject more than any other: father-son relationships and the troubled forms that they can take. No wonder Buckingham Palace is in a state of high alarm, with courtiers said to be asking themselves what, if anything, can be done to stop its publication. As the Mail on Sunday revealed last month, Harry has requested 11th hour rewrites in the wake of the Queen's death, with a source saying, "There may be things in the book which might not look so good if they come out so soon after these events. He wants sections changed now. It's not a total rewrite by any means. He desperately wants to make changes, but it might be too late." A source who worked with the author said, "JR goes deep into family relationships, particularly fathers and father figures. He delivers massive stories. He even got Agassi to admit to taking crystal meth." Some have gone so far as to speculate that Harry's memoir will throw King Charles under the bus. The fact Harry chose the Pulitzer Prize-winning author in the first place offers a tantalizing glimpse into what the tone and content of his book may be. The source said, "JR is meticulous. He's charming and easygoing, but he has a killer nose for a story. He's spent his life writing about broken men and family relationships, starting with his own broken family. When publisher Penguin Random House announced last year that it had clinched Harry's autobiography as part of a £40 million 3-book deal, it was touted as an intimate and heartfelt memoir, with Harry saying he would be writing it not as the prince I was born, but as the man I have become. There has been speculation Harry will use his book to settle scores and might finally reveal the royal family member who, Meghan claims, asked what color the baby's skin would be when she was pregnant with Archie. Certainly Penguin Random House expects the book to be a global bestseller. A publishing source told the Mail on Sunday, "It's being guarded like Fort Knox. Only a handful of people have read the manuscript. The first draft was very touchy-feely, and it was sent back for more revelations to be added." Moehringer is believed to have been introduced to 38-year-old Harry by George Clooney, a friend of the prince who directed last year's film adaptation of the author's biography, The Tender Bar. While Moehringer and Harry grew up in vastly different circumstances, the author was raised in grinding poverty, there are parallels which are hard to ignore. It is no surprise to learn that Moehringer specializes in themes of loss and abandonment. The author, who studied Jung and Freud, anchored his own memoir around his troubled relationship with his father, a famous radio DJ who abandoned him as a child, leading him to seek companionship among the men who hung out at Publican's Bar in Manhasset, a commuter town on Long Island, New York. Meanwhile, Harry, whose relationship with Charles and stepmother Camilla is likely to come under the microscope, has been linked with surrogate father figures over the years, including former equerry Mark Dyer and, more recently, Canadian music producer David Foster, who helped arrange the Safe House on Vancouver Island to where the Sussexes escaped after Megxit. Both men have had issues with drinking. Moehringer quit alcohol in his mid-20s after realizing he was drinking to oblivion. Harry apologized when pictures of him drunkenly playing naked billiards ended up getting splashed across front pages around the world, saying, quote, "It was probably a classic case of me being too much army and not enough prince." Moehringer, like Harry, struggled to cope with the loss of a parent. He was raised in Manhasset, the setting for F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel The Great Gatsby. Moehringer and his mother lived at his grandparents' home after she split from his father, a DJ called Johnny Michaels, when he was a toddler. In his 2005 memoir, he calls it the shit house because it had only one bathroom, which was shared with 12 other family members. In Echoes of Princess Diana, who struggled with bulimia and a cold-hearted husband, Moehringer's mother Dorothy pushed through pain all her life. Toward the end of his book, Moehringer poignantly describes how, in a moment of clarity, he came to the realization his mother embodied the character traits he had been seeking in a father figure. Quote, "Every virtue I associated with manhood, toughness, persistence, determination, reliability, honesty, integrity, guts, my mother exemplified. I'd always been dimly aware, but at that moment, with my first glimpse of the warrior behind my mother's blank face, I grasped the idea fully and put it into words for the first time. All this searching and longing for the secret of being a good man, and all I needed to do was follow the example of one very good woman." End quote. Moehringer calls his own father, an unstable mix of charm and rage, and claims that when he was 7 months old, he tried to suffocate his mother with a pillow. 2 weeks later, his father also cornered his mother in the bathroom with a razor and detailed in a gruesome way how he was going to carve up her face before walking out on the family for good. At one point, Moehringer reflects on looking at himself in the mirror and finally coming to terms with the fact his father had gone. Your father is not a good man, but you are not your father. Saying this to the young man in the mirror with the shaving cream beard, I felt independent, free, end quote. While Harry, of course, suffered no physical violence or material hardship, he has talked about the psychological devastation of losing his mother when he was 12 and of trying to bury his emotions. In one interview, he said, I can safely say that losing my mum at the age of 12, and therefore shutting down all of my emotions for the last 20 years, has had a quite serious effect on not only my personal life, but my work as well. I have probably been very close to a complete breakdown on numerous occasions. My way of dealing with it was sticking my head in the sand, refusing to ever think about my mum, because why would that help? It's only going to make you sad, it's not going to bring her back. So from an emotional side, I was like, right, don't ever let your emotions be part of anything. And then I started to have a few conversations, and actually all of a sudden, all of this grief that I have never processed started to come to the forefront, and I was like, there's actually a lot of stuff here that I need to deal with, end quote. While Harry left school with 2 A levels and went into the army, Moehringer used his whip-smart brain to earn a scholarship to Ivy League Yale University, where he felt like an outsider because of his poor background. After graduation, he became a journalist, working his way up from the Rocky Mountain News to the LA Times. He quickly developed a reputation for brilliant, in-depth feature reporting. He received the Pulitzer Prize, American journalism's highest honor, for a 2000 article in the LA Times called Crossing Over, a portrait of a small town in the racially divided Deep South, where a river separates black descendants of slaves from the descendants of white slave owners. That led to a book deal, The Tender Bar, which Agassi read during the 2006 US Open. He loved it so much that he invited Moehringer to ghostwrite his autobiography, which he called Open. In what might be a taste of how Moehringer might have worked with Harry, the author described how he got to the core of Agassi. The first thing that we did was we started a long, really wonderful conversation about his life. It worked like therapy. I sat in a straight-back chair and Andre sat on a couch, and I had a pad in my lap, and he really dug deep, and together we found patterns and themes in his life. I started reading like Freud and Jung and giving myself this crash course in psychology. Once we'd amassed this enormous, it was like 1100 or 1200 pages of transcript, then we dug through it together and we found themes together. There was nothing that I imposed on his life from above. This really was the purest kind of collaboration, but what seemed plain to me was that he'd responded to my book because it all started with a complex, difficult relationship with my father. That was something that he was really able to relate to. Moehringer is married to Shannon Welch, 45, a book editor, and has 2 young children. The family live in a $3.2 million home in Berkeley, California. Another thing he shares with Harry is his love of therapy speak, using phrases such as, the first step in learning, I decided, was unlearning, and while I fear that we're drawn to what abandons us, in the end, I believe we're defined by what embraces us. Friends of Moehringer tell the Mail on Sunday they have no doubt that Harry's memoir will dig deep and contain bombshells. Buzz Bissinger, the co-author of Caitlyn Jenner's 2017 memoir, called Moehringer absolutely the fucking best at what he does. He added, there's no one like him. He's careful about who he picks. He picks subjects who have a lot to say as opposed to most subjects who have nothing to say. He is by far the best out there. Mr. Bissinger said that in person Moehringer is pretty shy and remote, but exacting. He said he really has elevated ghostwriting because he's not just a great journalist, but a great writer too. He's the best. He writes beautifully, and he's the one they all want. Kevin Anderson, chief executive of the Kevin Anderson Associates editorial and ghostwriting agency, said, JR is a legend in the industry. Open, Agassi's book, was the first time he did any ghostwriting. That book is one of the best memoirs ever penned. It went really deep. That's what he's known for. He's not willing to work with people unless they will go there and get really deep. It's a lot of work up front before you start writing, especially with a memoir. It's a whole story, but it's how you weave it together. You have to figure out what the driving themes are, but still make it honest and still capture everything and don't leave anything out. That can get tricky when you're working on a celebrity memoir. Readers want to know the dirt, and if you don't include it, then people see it as disingenuous, not giving up the true story. JR has been successful at digging deep and getting the worst of the worst out of people, which is the very thing that Harry's father, King Charles, now surely fears. Wow, that's a very long, highly detailed, extremely hyperbolically flattering profile with many well-placed, incredible sources for a scared, anonymity-loving ghostwriter who shut the shade on that crazy lady. Who do you think wrote this? Caroline Graham? J.R. Moehringer? Or was it a
Collaboration so close, so synchronous, you'd have to call the eventual voice a hybrid.
It's pretty clear to me that Moehringer has been using Harry the same way he uses Agassi as his famous red herring to garner publicity for himself. The question is, does Harry know that? Did he and his wife walk into that party feeling genuinely fragile or closer to guilty, a bit fearful of being called out?
So I called the only friend who might. It was like telling Taylor Swift about a bad breakup. It was like singing Hallelujah to Leonard Cohen. Harry was all heart. He asked if my family was okay, asked for physical descriptions of the people harassing us, promised to make some calls, see if anything could be done. We both knew nothing could be done, but still, I felt gratitude and some regret.
Again, he's got it twisted. Harry is not your friend. He is your client, coworker, perhaps. Friends is what you might become if you really vibe well together and keep in touch months and years after the fact. What do you think is going on here? Let me know in the comments below. Is JR pick me? Is he a social climber? Is he just there for the business networking and using friends in the California sense? Is he a narc like Meghan who has no friends, so he calls everyone his friend? Especially people he wants to use and get away with using, like Harry? What exactly is going on here?
I'd worked hard to understand the ordeals of Harry Windsor, and now I saw that I understood nothing. Empathy is thin gruel compared with the marrow of experience. One morning of what Harry had endured since birth made me desperate to take another crack at the pages in Spare that talk about the media.
Until you need to promote your next project or, failing that, get a job, right?
Too late. The book was out. The party in full swing. As we walked into the house, I looked around, nervous, unsure of what state we'd find the author in. Was he, too, feeling fragile? Was he as keen as I was to organize a global boycott of TK Maxx? He appeared, marching toward us, looking flushed. Uh-oh, I thought, before registering that it was a good flush.
With all the talk of alcoholism thus far, what exactly do you mean by good flush? Do you mean good for him, or do you mean good for you?
His smile was wide as he embraced us both. He was overjoyed by many things. The numbers, naturally. Guinness World Records had just certified his memoir as the fastest-selling non-fiction book in the history of the world. But more than that, readers were reading, at last, the actual book, not Murdoch chunks laced with poison, and their online reviews were overwhelmingly effusive. Many said Harry's candor about family dysfunction, about losing a parent, had given them solace.
That's not true. The reviews were roundly mocking in tone, and most people bought the book for its train wreck quality.
The guests were summoned into the living room. There were several lovely toasts to Harry. Then the prince stepped forward. I'd never seen him so self-possessed and expansive. He thanked his publishing team, his editor, me. He mentioned my advice to trust the book, and said he was glad that he did, because it felt incredible to have the truth out there, to feel, his voice caught, free. There were tears in his eyes. Mine too.
This is a bit creepy because it parallels exactly a quote from Moehringer's memoir used in that Mail on Sunday article he supposedly knew nothing about.
It felt incredible to have the truth out there, to feel, his voice caught, free.
Saying this to the young man in the mirror with the shaving cream beard, I felt independent, free.
And yet, once a ghost, always a ghost. I couldn't help obsessing about that word, free. If he'd used that in one of our Zoom sessions, I'd have pushed back. Harry first felt liberated when he fell in love with Meghan, and again when they fled Britain, and what he felt now, for the first time in his life, was heard. That imperious Windsor motto, never complain, never explain, is really just a prettified omerta, which my wife suggests might have prolonged Harry's grief. His family actively discourages talking, a stoicism for which they're widely lauded, but if you don't speak your emotions, you serve them, and if you don't tell your story, you lose it, or what might be worse, you get lost inside it.
For those of you who don't know the word omerta, it is a Sicilian word of Spanish origin. A lot of people don't know this, but Sicily was actually ruled by Spain for 400 years, from around 1400, when it was inherited by somebody in the House of Aragon, until around 1800, when Napoleon invaded Naples. The Spanish rulers of Naples and Sicily had to decamp to Sicily, protected by the British, and the island became a British stronghold against Napoleon. After that, history ensues. But the point is, the word historically meant us Sicilians sticking together against the Spanish. In the modern era, it has mafia connotations. Us mafiosi sticking together against the law of whatever country, probably the United States. It's a kind of pledge of silence. And obviously, other gangs operate by the same code, even if they use different words for it. No talking, no cooperating, no flipping, I don't know. There's even a kindergartner's code, right? Don't be a tattletale. Omerta is a very serious vow to protect criminals committing crimes. To say never complain, never explain is an omerta is a ludicrous insult.
Telling is how we cement details, preserve continuity, stay sane. We say ourselves into being every day, or else. Heard, Harry. Heard. I could hear myself making the case to him late at night, and I could see Harry's nose wrinkle as he argued for his word, and I reproached myself once more. Not your effing book.
There actually is a perfect Sicilian phrase for all these people. Acqua davanti e vento darrere. It means water ahead, wind behind. It's a relatively polite way to say fuck off to somebody who you were trying to help because you felt bad for them, but they're so awful and annoying you can't.
But after we hugged Harry goodbye, after we thanked Meghan for toys she'd sent our children, I had a second thought about silence. Ghosts don't speak? Says who? Maybe they can. Maybe, sometimes, they should.
Yeah, no one else cares about this question. We are entirely indifferent to this quandary you face, J.R. Moehringer. On one hand, discussing your famous ginger herring really did help you promote yourself. Kudos. On the other, don't imagine people like me who criticize H&M as a hobby don't see right through you. I wonder what your Cumhammer profile would be. Rags to riches, Pulitzer winning, psychiatric memoirist victim. I don't know. This video has really been a journey. At first I thought Moehringer was a befuddled shug. Now I think he's a name-dropping narc. If you've listened to this video, if you've made it through to the end of this video, first of all, thank you very much. You are an incredible person. I love you. Also, please let me know what you think of this guy in the comments below. Would you let him write your memoir? I wouldn't. I definitely would not. I'll see you soon with some hopefully less boring material. Toodles! Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.